I just was writing Reuben's character. I knew he was former LAPD, and it was just like bing, bang, boom. All of a sudden, I'm like, ding-a-ling-ling, those characters from those other stories. Hello, hello, I am back. That's a little Howard Stern nod, in case you didn't know. I'm obsessed with Howard Stern. I love him. I am Dina Haynes. Welcome to my channel. If you've been coming back, thank you for being so loyal and sticking with the story this far. I appreciate your loyalty. And for those of you who are new, now's the time in the video to check the link out in the video. I think it's here. And also down below in the description, you're definitely going to want to go back to the beginning so that you know who the characters are, what's been going on until now, because things have just started heating up. And I'm about to drop some spoilers on the last chapter, chapter 18. Reuben's got a bromance. He's got an old friend, Carter, his sergeant, when he was in the LAPD. Sergeant Carter trained him. They worked together very closely and just formed this bromance. And Carter shoots it to him straight, you know, about love and how it makes you go crazy. And I wrote a series called Safety Off, and it was like basically a trilogy that followed a single mom who was a cop, and she meets this younger guy. They have this intense sexual relationship. It was really my attempt at trying to do erotica, but really it came out more like sexy contemporary romance. So because I guess what I learned from that is that my thing really is all about the story, the connection between the two people, not so much the sex, although there is quite a bit of sex in that story. But that's where I got those characters for. And I don't know why. I think because everything takes place in LA, all of my stories pretty much take place in LA. They might go out and travel a little bit, but they all pretty much take place here. And I don't know, I thought it would be so cool and kind of funny to put those characters in, and they just fit perfectly, you know, with Reuben having been in former LAPD. And it's funny how those surprises just come out. I mean, it wasn't anything that I had planned. Every town is small, and you never know who knows who and how people are connected. And so I don't know, I threw it in and I thought it was kind of cool. So drop a comment below and tell me what you think, if you think that's a cool idea, linking separate series together. So let's not waste any time. Let's get into chapter 19. Chapter 19, Neesa's perspective. Sundays were at times my busiest day for showings. After the week I'd had, I cleared my schedule and visited my favorite equestrian stables, where I saddled up Stella and took her for a ride. What started out as a quick 1-hour trail walk and run doubled in time. Stella was a good listener, the kind of listening done with the heart, and an even better reflection of my emotional state. I was so disgusted by my choices in men that I couldn't look at myself in the mirror. No one had betrayed me more than me. I had put myself in that situation with David. With what he'd said about Ben, I couldn't even look back on our date, which was wonderful in comparison, without being suspicious of Ben's motives too. I remembered that this was why I'd given up the search for love in the first place. With my track record, I shouldn't have been trusted to choose wallpaper, let alone a boyfriend. It still didn't make sense how someone could be so cruel after going to such lengths to impress me, as if I had gone to dinner with the devil. During a phone call to my mom the same night, she told me that David wasn't worth my tears, but I had already shed too many by that point. I must have sounded dire since she avoided subjecting me to the "I told you so" speech. I had avoided Ben altogether, fearing what he would say when he found out. Instead, I diminished the bond I thought I'd felt for him to an insignificant one-night stand. I'd just as soon cut all ties and avoid further humiliation. Stella was gentler in her reflection. We exhausted ourselves in an emotional purging run, and out of it came forgiveness, mainly for myself, for the mistakes I'd made, but also for David, who hurt me because I'd rejected him. It was clear he'd gone out of his way to impress me, and he didn't achieve his desired outcome. As for Ben, it still didn't make sense why he would sleep with me to make David jealous, but I forgave him too. Still, trust had remained out of reach. The warnings from both my mother and Ben were too painful to bear, knowing I had refused to listen. I was finally becoming a witness to my self destructive choices, but I had no clue how to heal from them and shift the pattern around. I ended up at my favorite spa, where I indulged in a deep tissue massage with a steam afterward. Hours later, my brain was in a numb haze as I pulled into my driveway. Colors splashed across the sky over the Silver Lake Hills in shades ranging from magenta to fiery yellow. I engaged the emergency brake and put the car in park. For a moment, I sat there, my limbs heavy with relaxation and my mind peacefully empty. I patted my hand around inside my purse and stumbled across my cell phone. I hadn't looked at it the whole day because I knew whose texts and calls would be there, and I didn't want to think about him. Acknowledging him, or people in general, would turn me into a puddle of tears. I popped the frunk on my Tesla X and got out. The Santa Ana winds picked up, and I pulled my sweater's hood over my head, insulating the warmth still lingering from the steam room at the spa. I retrieved my groceries and proceeded inside, excited about the meal I was about to cook for one. The alarm beeped as usual when I entered the house, but there were no telltale scratches on the Spanish tiles. Enola must have been in the backyard, though that had never stopped her from coming to greet me before. "Nola," I called out. I flicked on the kitchen light and placed the groceries on the island. An eerie quiet settled over the space. Then I heard her whimper. My head jerked toward the sliding glass door, and I yelped. A man stood there, silhouetted in the darkening sky, holding my most precious fur baby. The sound of my heart beating pounded in my ears. David was my first thought until I realized he didn't know where I lived, and besides, the figure was bigger and wider. Ben was the last person I wanted to see. I hadn't prepared for our next encounter, not today when my feelings were still raw. Not when I hadn't figured out a convincing way to tell him I didn't want to see him anymore. I flipped the outside light switch and approached the door. I waited a moment to let his roguishly handsome features settle over me. With my impulses under control, I unlatched the glass panel and slid it open. Up close, fresh lines cut grooves around his eyes, and deep shadows darkened the skin underneath them. My heart recognized his anguish, but I wouldn't let myself go to him. Enola squiggled madly and licked his face in her excitement to see me. I said, "Give her to me." I held my arms out, blocking the doorway. Ben repositioned Enola under the crook of his arm and angled her away from me. He said, "I came to talk." I trembled with weariness, fresh anger washing away the relaxing effects of my spa day. "There's nothing to say, and it's cold." He said, "I disagree." His anger was a surprise. "Tell me what I did wrong. Let me fix it." I said, "I'm tired and hungry, and I don't want to fight." He said, "Me either." He stepped closer, and I flinched. "Denise, what? Talk to me, please." The cold draft cut through my layers and blew away the last warmth from my steam room experience. Worried about catching cold, I stepped aside, and he walked into the room, placing Enola in my arms. She wiggled herself senseless, licking my face and whining. I put her down and closed the sliding door, cutting off the wind that had whipped big gusts inside my home. The last thing I wanted was for him to see me so emotionally defenseless. My throat strained to keep from sobbing as I opened my mouth to speak. "I don't want you here any longer than you need to be, so I'll get to the point. David told me everything. You went on our date to fuck me and get back at him for some beef between you two. End of story." I crossed my arms, praying for him to leave. I didn't want to hear his excuses. I knew he'd used them to pry his way back into my heart, which in its raw state was still glaringly open. As angry as I felt, I couldn't banish the image of our last time together, his body between my legs, thrusting away inside me. "See? Traitor, me." Reuben said, "He tell you that? Is that why you slapped him?" I gaped as his comment sank in. "You were there?" Reuben said, "I told you I'm an investigator. He was a client until over a week ago, but I said, "But you what? What aren't you telling me?" He said, "I can't tell you about the case. All I know is he gave me the creeps, and I've had my eyes on him ever since." Just when I thought I couldn't get more weary, I said, "You sick bastards. Is this a game to you?" My breath hitched. "Leave me out of it." He said, "What are you talking about? I'm not playing games here." He matched my tone and took a step forward. Tears streamed down my face when he reached for me. I took a half step back and said, "Don't." He said, Denise, you think I would go to all this trouble just to... I told you not to trust him, didn't I? Whatever he said to you about me, he's lying. I told you to stay away from him, but you're so pig-headed. Look, I know I've always been on shaky ground with you, but I'm making a real effort here. I don't text women 50 times a day on a whim, ever. And I sure as hell don't show up on their doorstep and wait 6 hours for them to get home so I can get yelled at and have to defend myself. I'm not a stalker. I'm a PI, for Christ's sakes. He was so visibly upset that I had to wonder if he wasn't telling the truth. He continued, I haven't spoken to David since I saw him at your showing. I threatened him to stay away from you. I said, so then how did you know to be there that night at the restaurant? He said, I kept surveilling him because I wanted to make sure you were okay. I'd be risking my license if I told you the details of the case. There's nothing criminal in his background, but I just don't trust him. I tried to get that across to you, but that's my fault. I understood his limitations, but they didn't cure my wariness. He said, I'm sorry I scared you out there. I don't normally threaten to kidnap dogs. I'm a cat person, for fuck's sake. I wanted to believe him, but my trust was damaged. Not in him, but in myself. I said, you really have a cat? I stalled to figure out how to break the news that I didn't want to see him anymore. Maybe if I said the words, my heart would follow suit. He said, yeah, the damn thing kept showing up on my doorstep whining, and when I tried to kick it off my porch, he ran inside and wouldn't leave. He forced himself on me. He kept trying to cheer me up, but I couldn't dump my depression so easily. And even if some pathetic part of me wanted him to stay, I thought it best to be alone for the night. I said, Ben, I think we should... He said, did he hurt you? He reached out to me. I still bought into the idea that my instincts were dangerous, so I backed away and said, it doesn't matter now. He's out of my life. I heard the whoosh of the heater kicking on and removed my sweater before throwing it over the back of a chair in the breakfast nook. With my back to him, it was easier to begin again. Ben, I need to tell you. He said, stop. When I turned around, he stood before me and said, hey. He used a soothing tone and squeezed my shoulders, bending his tall frame at the knees to look into my eyes. Are you hearing me? I had nothing to do with him pursuing you. After you rejected me for what I thought was the last time, I waited outside for David so I could warn him to stay away from you. I was ready to walk away as long as I thought you were safe from him. And then the best thing happened to me. You and I had an amazing night together. At least I thought so. I'd hoped you wouldn't want to see him, but look at the damage he's done. This is the last thing I wanted to happen. I said, why was he so mean to you if he was your client? Reuben said, he didn't like the conclusions I came to in the investigation. Honestly, I was shocked to see him at your showing. I went there hoping to follow up with you after our last encounter and saw his car parked nearby. The guy is nuts, I tell you. God, the memory of us in the closet plucked at my spine like a guitar string, sending a shock through me. Reuben continued, it was never my intention to get you mixed in with this mess. I don't know why he has his sights on you, but if you push me away, then he's won. Don't do that. Don't let him get between us. Hey, I missed you this past week. Can't we put that asshole behind us and continue where we left off? We were doing so well before he came along. I didn't want to make the decision. I believed what he said, but I couldn't move. I couldn't tell him I didn't want to see him again while my body still reacted to his. My heart needed repairing, and he seemed like he might be the only one who could nurse it back to health. But if things went south again, I couldn't live with the decision if it were mine alone. Before I could stop him, his lips brushed over mine. I stepped back, shaking my head, but unable to form the word no. He said, tell me to stop. I shook my head again. I wouldn't. He came at me again. I knew what he was like. I couldn't resist. His kisses were soft and healing. My head spun and my feet went numb as he backed me into the pantry door and licked his way into my mouth. I needed him to break through my stubborn walls because perhaps I did trust him. I never stood a chance against him when he had those lips, those eyes, that fierce heart in his arsenal. One hand brushed up my back and the other up my neck, pulling my soft curves into his firm muscle, forcing me to grab hold of him. One hand brushed up my back and the other up my neck, pulling my soft curves into his firm muscle, forcing me to grab hold of him to maintain my balance. His lips were firm, like his embrace, his kisses deep one moment and beguiling in their sweetness the next. Altogether, it had a dizzying effect on me, I had to claw my way out to regain my senses. I said, "Reuben, slow down, please." My voice sounded weak, but I wanted to be strong right now. He stopped and pulled away without completely letting go of me. His forehead creased in a frown. He said, "He tell you my name?" I nodded. He said, "Don't call me that. Call me Ben." I said, "Why? Reuben's your name, isn't it?" He said, "It is, but when we made love, you screamed out Ben. That's what I want to remember. That's what I want you to call me." Wetness pooled in the seat of my panties. How did he do that to me? I said, "Okay, but no more lies. Understood?" He said, "Whatever you want, baby doll. Tell me whatever it is and I'll make it happen." Arousal gripped me as his rough voice sent a private message straight to my core. My mind came up with many different images of what he could do to me and where. My legs squeezed together at the thought. He needed to stop saying those kinds of things. I mumbled, "I need to cook dinner." I looked at his mouth and wished it were on my. He said, "I can help. What do you need me to do?" Ugh, I thought. I wasn't ready to accept his compliance, despite my body's craving. Because of my body's craving. I said, "I never said you could stay." A tense beat transferred between us. He said, "Are you asking me to leave?" When I took too long to respond, he walked over to the grocery bag I had left on the counter and unpacked its contents. This was where I tended to get into trouble. All he had to do was treat me with a little kindness and consideration, and I caved. Taryn from the cafe popped into my head. It's not fair to hold him accountable for the shit your ex-boyfriend did. Is that what was holding me back, comparing Ben to Tyson? I suppose Ben did warn me about David. Either I accepted what he'd said as true and got over my anger, or I showed him to the door. "What are we making?" he asked. That's the end of chapter 19. Please like the video and subscribe and hit the little bell icon so you'll be notified when the next video comes up, and I will see you next time.